Hello YouTube Vintage Stereo Restorers. This is part 2 of the Muntz 8000. It's up here on the bench. And I wasn't getting anything out of this. It was dead as a doornail except for the odd little flash. It's got one of these switches here. It's a speaker power switch. So you turn it from the first position, it turns on the power. Speaker A, speaker B, A and B, and then headphones only, something like that. It's almost exactly like the Pioneer and Kenwood switches. And I thought it was the switch. Well, it kind of was. The switch was so stiff from disuse, it actually was not coming all the way on and staying there. So a little neutral got it working just like nothing. And I realized something. Every control, they're still pretty stiff. I've been working them. And this must be one of these units that failed years ago. It wasn't working that good and was parked in a closet. Because that's what happens is the controls stiffen up. And, you know, at least they didn't throw it out, okay? Now, here's what was going on with this thing. Let's see if I can focus in on these resistors. Right there. This thing's kind of slow to focus. These are 4 resistors in the power supply section. And some of these got so hot that all the markings came off and the paint came off. But they didn't drift much from value. These are actually pretty good resistors for the era. And they are located in this section right here. This camera can be slow to focus. Right there. They're up tight against the board. The ones I replace them with are metal film, and they're off the board. And the one that runs the hottest, this one here, is off the board more. There's a bridge rectifier. That's the main cap. These two are output caps for the speakers because this is a quasi-complementary capacitor coupled amp. And then there's a couple more here. And what I noticed is, once I got it turning on, I wasn't getting any sound, not even a turn-on thump. There's no power on the outputs, no power on the phono board, no power going to the tuner. And if I just turn this around here, this thing's kind of heavy. It's actually very heavy, made out of good metal. Right here, you can see a little bit of tanning on there. And so what I've done is here, the foil was actually lifting from the heat. So when you put them back in, you got to kind of bend each lead over so they form a bridge so it's more solid. When they're soldered like this, just the lead through the hole and solder around it, heat will eventually break the connection. And that's why it wasn't working. It was actually this post right here, and I believe this one had become loose. So between the resistors overheating and peeling and everything coming loose, you had no power. Now it does. So everything's actually playing on this one. Both channels, actually very nice fidelity. There's the bottom of the preamp board. And anybody here, I'm not going to say what it is, but there's something very Marantzian about this board. If anybody knows what I'm talking about, just leave it in the comments. See if you know what I mean. Has to do with component placement. Anyway, there's the bottom of those caps. I'm going to replace the caps in the power supply section, the output caps, then have another listen to it. This thing, like I say, is very well built. And you know, I had this thought while I was having lunch. I've got another really well built unit sitting on a shelf. It's a Kenwood Trio TK66. Now this is from 73, 74. It's from 66 to 68. But it's the same kind of unit. It's heavy duty build. Like the build quality of it, the machine work on the cabinet, everything about it is really top notch. More top notch than their later products. And it's about the same wattage, about 25 watts a channel, quasi-complementary, capacitor coupled, very similar sized transformer and power supply. So this here is a Canadian unit made in Canada with a mixture of Canadian and Japanese components. And this would have kind of been the last of this type of thing. There wouldn't have been that many more made. Like Marsden was already, they had stopped making stuff. A lot of the companies like Fleetwood in Montreal that made record players and things like that, they were out of business at that point. So I'm going to do a little comparison between this and the Kenwood, which is very similar to Sansui's and pioneers of its time. And there's some foregone conclusions that you can have. And then there's some things that aren't obvious. One thing is, I think they both sound good and they're both well built. I'll give you that. But there are other things about the way they were built and maybe copied circuit designs, etc., that are different. And it was a real turning point in the electronics industry. I could go on and on about this, but within 5 to 10 years, people used to have televisions in their living room that were made in Canada or the US. And all of a sudden they were Sony TVs, Panasonic. You know, things changed very quickly. Say 1970 maybe is a turning point through the 70s. Same with electronics. The Japanese took over the industry in stereo electronics, except for some boutique brands, of course. But I could go on and on about this. So we're going to do a little comparison between the two. Anyway, thanks for watching and listening.